All right, Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez campaigned on affordable housing during her successful 2018 run for Congress.
Well, according to a new report, the champion for the working class is living in a new luxury apartment complex, despite her shouts against high-end real estate.
Tonight, while Governor Newsom is telling all of us to have Thanksgiving dinner outside, he's facing some new fallout for that fancy birthday dinner party he went to at the French Laundry. KPIX5 Joe Vasquez on the new photos and the new questions they raise.
You saw Donald Trump during the campaign mode at National Airport.
No, it doesn't. But he's also not fighting the oligarchy.
No. You run a campaign and you do 3 or 4 or 5 rallies in a week. The only way you can get around to talk to 30,000 people. Think I'm going to be sitting on a waiting line at United, waiting, 30,000 people are waiting? That's the only way you can get around. No apologies for that. That's what campaign travel is about. We've done it in the past. We're going to do it in the future.
Political tricks in the book is to stir up resentment against people who have succeeded, especially in ways that politicians have failed. And yet, some of the loudest critics of wealth are the very people who benefit most from the privileges of power. This is not new, it is not novel, it is not even particularly clever. Throughout history, demagogues have built entire careers and ruined entire nations by pitting one group against another. When politicians find themselves unable to compete in the realm of merit, innovation, or economic productivity, they often resort to the lowest common denominator, envy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are not originators of this strategy. They are merely its latest and most social media savvy practitioners. What they offer is not a revolution in thought, but a regurgitation of old fallacies, dressed in modern vocabulary, and what they seek is not justice, but power, concentrated power, administered by a centralized elite class under the guise of equity. Class warfare is not about lifting the poor, it is about controlling the population. The very term billionaire is treated as if it were an accusation rather than a mere description. But what is a billionaire, after all? Someone who has created enormous value, measured not in fiat currency, but in voluntary transactions. No one accidentally becomes a billionaire. No one stumbles into that status by fraud alone. Because fraud, unlike productivity, is not scalable. The real issue is not wealth, but control. Take Bernie Sanders. For years he has spoken with fiery condemnation about the top 1%. And yet, when his book sales pushed him into the top income bracket, he rationalized the success as just reward for his work. There's a lesson here, but not the one he thinks he's teaching. It is not that the rich are bad, it's that it's easier to criticize wealth when you don't yet have any. AOC, meanwhile, speaks of the marginalized while living in one of the most exclusive residential complexes in Washington, D.C., complete with concierge service and private security. She rails against border enforcement while benefiting from the protection of barriers around her own living quarters. This is not merely hypocrisy, it is entitlement masquerading as advocacy. Senator Elizabeth Warren, another high-profile crusader against inequality, built a career criticizing Wall Street while failing to disclose the deep financial ties that enrich her academic network. She took advantage of minority claims to further her academic career, a strategy of leveraging identity, not merit. When it came time to propose her wealth tax, she declared it a necessity for fairness, ignoring that such taxes in Europe have been repealed after economic stagnation and capital flight. Newsom, governor of California, who lectures the nation on equity and environmentalism while dining unmasked at the French Laundry restaurant during COVID lockdowns that crippled small businesses. In his state, tech billionaires fund progressive policies while homelessness rises, public schooling deteriorates, and working-class families flee. Ilhan Omar, who speaks of dismantling oppressive systems, receives campaign support from institutions embedded within the very elite structure she condemns. Her critiques of capitalism often include no coherent replacement only vague appeals to collectivist redistribution, as if central planning has not already failed catastrophically across the 20th century. These are not isolated incidents. They are reflective of a broader pattern in left-wing populism, where the narrative of oppression becomes a commodity. The struggle becomes branding. The indignation becomes a campaign strategy. And in all of this, the facts become inconvenient distractions. Let us talk about intentions versus outcomes, a distinction that is central to any honest discussion of public policy. The rhetoric of economic justice sounds appealing, especially when repeated often enough. But as I have said many times, policies must be judged by their consequences, not their intentions. When punitive taxes are imposed on high earners, the most common result is not greater revenue for the government, but capital flight. Investment diminishes, innovation slows, and employment suffers. These are not abstract economic models. They are repeatable realities borne out in history, from post-war Britain to modern-day California. And what of the workers these policies are meant to help? Low-skilled immigration, another favorite cause of the left, has a disproportionate impact on native-born low-income workers. When labor supply increases and demand remains constant, wages decline. Yet this obvious economic principle is ignored for the sake of posturing. Moreover, while AOC and Sanders decry the evils of Wall Street, their campaigns benefit from the technological infrastructure and corporate platforms built by the very people they claim to oppose. The hypocrisy is not peripheral, it is central. Historically, we have seen this before. The Bolsheviks demonized the kulaks, relatively successful peasants, while promising a workers' utopia. The result? Mass starvation and a totalitarian regime. Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution weaponized envy, destroyed intellectual capital, and turned neighbor against neighbor. The death toll from that ideological purity exceeds that of many wars. What AOC and Sanders peddle is not compassion. It is resentment. It is the moral camouflage of envy, repackaged as fairness. One must also examine the language: fair share, economic justice, people over profits. These are phrases designed to bypass thought and trigger emotion. But what is fair? Who decides? As I've said before, the most basic question is not what is best, but who shall decide what is best. Once that decision is centralized, freedom is no longer a guarantee. It becomes a conditional privilege. While billionaires are vilified, government elites are sanctified. The assumption seems to be that those who fail in the private sector are somehow more virtuous when wielding public power. This is not only illogical, it is dangerous. Those who create value through voluntary exchange are suspect. Those who wield coercion through legislation are trusted. The incentives in such a system are perverse. And we must talk about incentives. In politics, incentives are aligned with emotional manipulation, not with truth. A politician gains nothing by telling voters that trade-offs exist. It is far easier to promise utopia than to explain scarcity. It is easier to blame the rich than to study economics. Emotion is the currency of demagoguery. When Sanders talks about millionaires and billionaires, he is not proposing a solution. He is constructing a villain. And villains are useful because they require no empirical rebuttal, only moral condemnation. Selective outrage and media complicity complete the picture. Left-wing billionaires like George Soros or tech oligarchs aligned with progressive causes are often immune from scrutiny. Their wealth somehow is not considered problematic. It is not about income. It is about allegiance. Consider also the role of universities and media institutions, many of them overwhelmingly progressive, where the children of elites are taught to view capitalism as oppressive while enjoying the comforts it provides. Professors who earn six-figure salaries denounce income inequality while protected by tenure and funded by taxpayer subsidies. These are not revolutionaries. They are beneficiaries of a privileged system cloaked in progressive rhetoric. We must resist the temptation to confuse rhetoric with reason. Much of the social history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has been a history of replacing what worked with what sounded good. But the marketplace does not run on slogans. It runs on accountability, profit and loss, and the freedom to fail. Envy is not a virtue, it is corrosive. A society that rewards envy over effort, grievance over gratitude, and slogans over skill will not remain prosperous for long. The question is not whether billionaires should exist. The question is whether freedom should exist. Because billionaires are not the cause of poverty, they are a symptom of liberty. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And the first trade-off we must be willing to make is between flattery and truth. Let us choose truth.